We will begin the press conference shortly. Please submit your questions on WebEx. Before you do so, please state your name, your outlet, followed by your questions, and also one main and one follow-up question. Again, we will not be accepting any questions over the phone. Please submit all your questions you have on WebEx. Each outlet may submit up to 2 questions. Please state your name, your outlet, and your 2 questions. Thank you. Test, test. For the press conference. Please type in all your questions on WebEx. No questions will be accepted on the phone. Thank you. folks over WebEx and telephone, I'm doing a sound check. This is Victor Lim. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. If you can hear me, please respond on the WebEx chat. Thank you. Try to adjust the volume. If there's any problems, you can take the volume on YouTube on the SFGov TV channel.
Good morning, everyone. I'm San Francisco Mayor London Breed. I'm joined here today with our Police Chief, Bill Scott, as well as our Fire Chief, Janine Nicholson. First of all, I just want to take this opportunity to just really address the hurt and the pain and the frustration that I know so many people, not only in San Francisco, but across the country, share for the unfortunate consistent violence that we see as it relates to African American men who unfortunately are killed by police officers. This is what we know is sparked what you are seeing as it relates to protest. being sick and tired of being sick and tired, being frustrated by not seeing a change, and seeing this play itself out all over the country. We know that here in San Francisco, we've made a lot of gains with our time and distance and our complicit bias training and other things to try and make sure that our officers have what they need to understand and appropriately police our communities with also compassion and respect. And it has been very difficult when you see what you see that happened to George Floyd and others. It is hard not to have a reaction. It is hard not to feel the pain, especially when you hear someone who is struggling and others are standing around and watching and not doing anything. The thing that was the most heartbreaking was when we saw him calling for his mother. I know that that touched a chord with me, it touched a chord with so many people, and sadly, he is no longer with us. And that is what we know is at the heart of the protest. We know that people are frustrated, they're hurt, they're upset, they're angry, all kinds of emotions. I know that not only am I feeling these emotions, but we also know that there are a number of people who work within law enforcement that feel the same way too. And as a city, we will do better. As a country, we have to do better because we know that this situation that constantly has played itself out in this way cannot continue. So I want to just express my understanding and appreciation for those who are peacefully protesting, for those who want a forum and want to come together and express themselves, even if what you have to say is not something that anyone wants to hear. You know, even if it's negative or people are angry and upset and mad and hurt, everyone has the right to express themselves verbally in any way they see fit, especially when it's difficult to process your emotions. So I get that. I understand that. And I empathize with what we are all feeling collectively. And as mayor, it doesn't mean that I'm immune from feeling the hurt and the pain. Having my own experiences, especially growing up here in San Francisco. It's why I ran for mayor. It's why I got into politics, because I wanted to change things. And part of what is very challenging here is we know that on the one hand, yesterday, for example, there was a large, peaceful protest that started early on at City Hall. And there were a lot of people, of course, expressing themselves and peacefully protesting. There were a few marches and a number of other gatherings, and eventually, as night began to fall, those protests turned into violence. There were, unfortunately, assaults on people, including police officers. There was vandalisms on vehicles and businesses. There were fires lit, and that is really not something that we can tolerate. And in fact, you know, in watching the videos, I was extremely upset because, unfortunately, with some of the vandals, they thought this was a game. They thought this was funny. And this is not funny. To damage property, to set fires that could lead to someone else's death, to do the kinds of things that destroy and tear down our city as a symbol of what is going on and how to address it. This is not who we are. We should not be okay with this. And I also want to point out that there were a lot of young people out there. In fact, a lot of juveniles. So parents, Where are your kids? Where are your kids? The fact that we had so many situations occur all over San Francisco in a way that has tried to destroy and tear down our city is not something that we're going to tolerate. We will always support and tolerate peaceful protest because people deserve to have that vehicle. But when it rises to the level of a crime, we have an obligation. We have an obligation. And so we will do what we need to do to protect the city so that people are safe. That includes even, unfortunately, sometimes doing things that make people uncomfortable, bringing in additional law enforcement, bringing in additional resources. When you think about it, if someone is hurt and they call 911, who's the first to show up to the scene? Our firefighters and paramedics. But they were inundated with fires that were deliberately set, with Molotov cocktails that were thrown and ignited fires. They were inundated. So what happens if your mother is having a heart attack and there's no one to come to her rescue? And we're in the midst of COVID-19. And just imagine how many more infections are going to occur because of these large gatherings, because they're not necessarily being done safely. So we have decided, as I said last night, to implement a curfew. It'll be effective 8 o'clock tonight. Of course, the exemptions are our healthcare workers and our police and firefighters and other public safety personnel. But it will be in force 8 a.m. tonight until 8 p.m. tonight until 5 a.m. in the morning. And until we see that the situation is under control, we will allow the curfew to remain. And the other thing that we have done is gotten support from law enforcement, from the governor's office, and I'll have the chief talk a little bit about that, but we have to make sure that we are prepared to ensure that what happened in our city doesn't happen tonight. So for those of you who are thinking about coming to San Francisco to cause havoc, we're going to be ready, and we're going to do what we need to do in order to protect the city. We, again, welcome peaceful protest, but we will not tolerate violence and crime. So I ask for your cooperation and also your understanding that we can't just sit by and let you destroy our city. We will do what we need to do. And so I want to really, let the people of San Francisco know that I know that we've been asking a lot of you, especially during COVID-19. We've asked an awful lot of the people of San Francisco. And I want to just express my appreciation for what you have done in playing a role in helping us to not only flatten the curve, but supporting this curfew, which is absolutely necessary for public safety. So at this time, I want to turn it over to Chief Bill Scott, who will talk a little bit about some of the challenges of last night, as well as our plans for this evening once the curfew is implemented.
Good morning. Again, thank you, Mayor, for your leadership on this issue, as well as your leadership during our COVID pandemic. I'm going to start out just to echo some of what Mayor Breed just said about how we all are feeling right now. And I'm going to be very brief, but I'll be straight to the point on this issue. We understand the reason we're here. Too many African-American men have been killed at the hands of law enforcement needlessly. We know that. This is not a new issue. This is not a new emotion. Part of what is driving us as professionals in the law enforcement world is to change this narrative. We have the leadership in this city to commit to change. We understand it. We know it. And as an African American man, I think I know probably more than most how it feels. I know both sides of this equation. We're seeing violence across the country. We're seeing peaceful protests across the country. And with that, people have expressed to us what they are feeling, what they are thinking, and they want to be heard, and we do hear you. We do hear you. The city leaders hear you. Your chief of police hears you. The San Francisco Police Department hears you. But we have work to do to keep each other, keep our city safe, and protect this city that we have worked so hard to build. And we don't want to see it go up in flames. I'm going to start by telling you what the themes that we're seeing in terms of how things are playing out in our city and across the country in terms of some of the trends. As the mayor stated, as Mayor Breed stated, our protests yesterday started peacefully, like most protests that we're seeing across the country in other cities. That went on for hours. The protest started at UN Plaza. It went to Civic Center. They marched down Market Street to the Embarcadero. They went to some other places. It was peaceful. We, the San Francisco Police Department, helped facilitate it. People were expressing themselves, and that's what people do when they protest. The Constitution gives us the right to do that, and that's what your police department is here to protect. As darkness fell, we started to see things heat up in terms of violence, in terms of just the attacks and the viciousness against the police officers that were out there to protect people's freedoms, against innocent people, business owners, people who were just out there to exercise the expressions that they have a right to exercise, were being attacked. And we started to see that violence escalate to the point of windows being shattered, businesses being looted, and then businesses being destroyed. And that's what we're seeing in other places, and we saw it last night. Last night, our primary objective was to save lives, to make sure that nobody lost their life. Because as bad as things were last night here, it could have been a lot worse. There are people dying in this country in these protests. And thank goodness we did not lose a life last night. Our second objective was to keep people safe and keep people from getting hurt. And that's everybody. The protesters, the police officers, the firefighters, the people that were there just trying to protect their business and hold on to the things that they can hold on to, and the people who were breaking the law. Everybody needed to be protected. The third thing is to protect property. As the mayor said, people were deliberately starting fires, throwing Molotov cocktails at officers, throwing Molotov cocktails at businesses. We, with our fire department, and you'll hear from Chief Nicholson in a second, had an objective to put those fires out as quickly as we could. Because if we get tied up on a significant fire, then our resources are on that fire, and they can't protect the people who are out there protesting, the people who are out doing what they do in their daily activities of life, and we can't protect the other businesses that need protecting. So that was our third objective, to protect businesses and property. And our overarching objective was to keep order in our city. And when we lost order in our city, to restore order as quickly as possible. Those were our objectives. It was a challenging night. We were successful, as I stated, in putting out fires quickly. We didn't have any structures burned to the ground, thank goodness. We didn't have anybody hurt or killed by fires, even though people in that crowd were launching Molotov cocktails at individuals and at officers and at police cars. Nobody was hurt. It's unacceptable to see that type of behavior in any place. It's unacceptable in the city and county of San Francisco. The mayor has ordered a curfew, and I want to be very clear. What that means is if you're not exempted, don't be outside. And I know many of you are asking, well, how is that going to be enforced? If you're not exempted, don't be outside. We have doctors, nurses, hospital workers who need to go to work. We have public transportation workers who need to go to work. We have firefighters, we have police officers, we have elected officials who need to lead their city. Yeah, those people will be outside and they will be allowed to do what they do. But if you're one of those people and you get stopped, you must understand that we are just doing our jobs. And if we stop you and ask you what you're doing and where you're going, please understand that we are doing our jobs. We're doing what you pay us to do. Now, we will do that constitutionally. We will do that with dignity. We will do that with respect, but we will do that. As far as the looting, last night we made 10 arrests, felony arrests for looting. There were a lot more people detained than that. The mayor mentioned there were kids out there, juveniles. Many who were detained, released, some cited. We're still putting together all the statistics, but what I know right now is we had 10 felony arrests where people were booked for looting. We've been working with the district attorney because of our public health emergency that we are still in, by the way, to enhance the charges for those who are breaking into businesses during a state of emergency, to add looting to the charges. That will continue. The enhancements for looting will continue. We don't have a solid grasp on how much damage was done last night. Business owners and business managers have to inventory their stock. They have to assess the damage, and we don't have those numbers. But I can tell you just from what I saw, there was significant damage in our city. So here's how we'd like to move forward. We have to restore order. There will be protests. Today we know there's going to be protests, and we hope they start out peacefully. We hope they remain peacefully. No tolerance from this city for people who come here with the intention to break the law. No tolerance in this city for people who come here with the intention to start fires. No tolerance in this city for people who come here with the intention to assault our police officers and our firefighters. Those criminal activities will be enforced. Thanks to our mayor, she reached out to the state to get additional resources for us so we can prepare for today and moving forward. The state has agreed to send additional law enforcement personnel, around 200, to the city and county of San Francisco. We will coordinate those resources, we will deploy them effectively, and we will keep our city safe. We don't know how long this is going to last. We hope that we see an end to this very quickly, but I'd like to go back to what the mayor said and remind everyone, we are still in the midst of a global pandemic. When we ask you not to leave your homes, now you have 2 reasons not to leave your homes. The virus is still out there. There's still the potential for exposure. We have a curfew because we're attempting to keep our city safe. And I hope you're like me and the rest of us in this room, that you care enough about your family and you care enough about the people you love to use good judgment and do what's being asked of you. We need your help. We need your cooperation. As a police officer with 31 years in this business, I will close with this. In 1992, when I was with the Los Angeles Police Department, I had 2.5 years as a police officer. I was at work on April 29th, 1992. "64 people died that night. 64 people. Think about that. Stay at home. Follow the mayor's lead. Follow what we're asking you to do. Stay at home. Now I'd like to turn it over to my partner, Fire Chief Janine Nicholson. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Fire Chief Janine Nicholson. I'd like to thank Mayor Breed for her leadership throughout not just our pandemic, but the incidents that have been going on for the past several days here in San Francisco. We understand this is an extremely challenging and emotional time. And from a fire department perspective, we will always, always be there for you. What I can say about last night is that we responded to dozens and dozens of fires throughout different parts of the city that were intentionally set, both on the street and in businesses, as well as vehicles. And this is unacceptable. Obviously, we are here for you, for the public, but this cannot go on, and this is why this curfew is so important. We also responded to approximately 250 medical calls, and many of those were as the result of violence. And it is really, really tragic for this to be going on in our city. We know we are all grieving, not just for the loss of the gentleman in Minnesota, but there are issues throughout the country. And I'm so grateful that we have a mayor here who knows that and understands that and is leading us through that. I'm also grateful for my partner in public safety, Chief Scott. So this curfew is necessary because we don't want to be putting out dozens and dozens of fires a night. We don't want to be responding to dozens and dozens of calls of vandalism and violence. So please pay attention, protect yourselves and your families, and abide by the curfew. Thank you.
Our first questions are for Mayor London Breed. Madam Mayor, your first question is from Julie Chang, KQED. Can you touch on how the protests and curfew will affect reopening?
Well, I think it's going to be very challenging as we implement reopening for our businesses throughout San Francisco. Unfortunately, we will need to implement that curfew even with our business community at this time. So I think depending on how long these protests continue to get unruly is going to help determine whether or not we will be able to allow those businesses to open past 8 o'clock. Our goal is to still move forward with our estimated timeline on reopening, but the timing of the ability for those businesses to stay open past 8 o'clock might be challenging, and we are hopeful that this does not last too long.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The next question is from Carrie Sisto, Hoodline. How will the unhoused population in the Tenderloin and Soma be affected by the curfew? Are there any immediate actions underway to move them off the sidewalks?
So what we are doing by setting up sanctioned tent encampment areas, we're trying to move people as quickly as we can off of the sidewalk, and we have already designated a few areas and are continuing to work on that, but our unhoused residents are exempt from the curfew.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The next questions are for San Francisco Police Chief Bill Scott. Chief Scott, your first question is from Bob Butler, KCBS Radio. Of the arrests made over the last 3 or 4 nights, how many of those people are from outside San Francisco, the Bay Area, and California?
You know, we're still processing that information, Bob. We've been working throughout the night, and we will get that information out as soon as we have it. I can tell you just from what I saw last night when I was out there with our officers, some of the people that were detained were definitely from outside the city, but as far as the arrest, we'll get that information as it becomes available.
Okay, the next question is from Julie Chang, KQED. How do you plan to enforce the curfew?
I'm going to say it again. Stay at home. It's like every other law that's on the books. We have speeding laws. We have a ton of laws on the books. If you're out and you're not supposed to be out and you're not on the exemption list, just know that you can be stopped, you can be cited, you can be arrested if the circumstances dictate. Stay at home. I don't have a crystal ball to predict how many people will get cited and arrested. We hope, like we saw with COVID, that the majority of people that are listening to us will follow the instructions and what we're asking them to do, but I can't predict that. What I will tell you is if you're not supposed to be out, you are subject to being stopped, you are subject to being cited within the law, and so think about that before you go out.
Next question is from Noah Arroyo, SF Public Press. Are the 200 additional law enforcement personnel from State Highway Patrol or the National Guard?
Well, we're coordinating with the California Office of Emergency Services. I can't tell you right now where they're coming from. The mayor made the request last night, and we've been working throughout the night to coordinate, and at some point, hopefully sooner than later, we'll know where those resources are coming from. What I can tell you is they are law enforcement resources from throughout the region within a proximity that can get to our city in a reasonable amount of time. So as that unfolds, we'll know who's coming or how many from the California Highway Patrol as well as the other agencies that are gracious enough to lend their resources to the city of San Francisco.
Thank you, Chief. The next questions are for Executive Director Mary Ellen Carroll, San Francisco Department of Emergency Management. Director Carroll, your question is from Gerald Chin, SF Bay. Does the city recommend people who went out to protest yesterday or who plan to protest today get tested for COVID-19?
So again, it is a reminder that the mayor and the chief stated earlier, we are still in a public health emergency. We still want everyone to practice social distancing to the extent possible and definitely to wear masks while you're out. Testing is indicated if you develop symptoms or if you have exposure to someone who is a confirmed positive. In that case, we would recommend folks get tested. So the answer is to stick with our current protocols, test if you have exposure or if you develop symptoms, and we please ask everyone to the extent possible to take precautions, cover your face, and keep as much distance as possible.
Thank you, Director Carroll. This concludes our press conference.